Okay, well, good afternoon, and welcome to this course on the philosophic corruption of physics. Now, no special knowledge of physics is required for this course. My goal is to present the ideas in such a way that both a PhD in physics and the novice will find them interesting and intelligible. However, I will rely on your familiarity with the objectivist literature. And in particular, it will be helpful if you know the essentials of the history of philosophy, as presented in For the New Intellectual by Ayn Rand and The Ominous Parallels by Leonard Peikoff. I will be explaining the ideas in the history of philosophy as I go. Now I want to start by briefly describing my purpose in this course. In 1934, at the age of 29, Ayn Rand wrote in her first philosophic journal, "As to physics, learn why mind and reason are so decried as impotent when coping with the universe. Isn't there some huge mistake there?" Unquote. Well, yes, there is a huge mistake there, or rather a long, complex series of mistakes over about a 150-year period. And the purpose of this course is to trace some of the main steps of the disastrous developments that led to Ayn Rand's question. Now, if you've read The Ominous Parallels by Dr. Peikoff, you understand the history of politics in the modern era. Politics reached its zenith during the Enlightenment, when John Locke's theory of individual rights led to the creation of the United States. You know that Immanuel Kant and the philosophers that followed him brought about the destruction of that achievement and caused the horrifying politics of the 20th century. Now, my theme in this course is that physics has undergone an exactly parallel development. The modern era in physics began with the achievements of a contemporary and friend of John Locke, Isaac Newton. And just as in politics, physics had the philosophic ground cut from under it by Kant and his successors. In politics, that led to brutal dictatorships. In physics, it led to the gleeful rejection of causality and the insistence that we live in an unintelligible universe. Now, the ambitiousness of my theme is both a problem and the strength of this course. On the one hand, the attempt to tell this story in 6 hours is sheer insanity. On the other hand, it's the whole progression from Newton through quantum theory that is interesting. If I just discussed the irrationality of 20th century physics, I would leave it unintelligible how physics came to such a state. So I decided to sketch the whole rather than go into any detail on a particular part. And you've all heard Hegel's aphorism, "the true is the whole." Well, in this course, I'm following Harriman's corollary, "the interesting is the whole." Now, why should you care about this topic? For physicists and students of physics, the answer is obvious. I don't have to motivate you. This material is essential to a fundamental understanding of your science. Now, it's true that many physicists today just use the equations without worrying about the fundamentals. But that's the attitude of a hack, not a serious scientist. And I know no one here has that attitude. But what motivation can I offer the majority of you who are non-physicists? Why should you care whether physics today is irrational? How does it affect you? Well, I think it affects you in two ways. First, you know that physics is the foundation of technology. The discovery of fundamental truths in theoretical physics can have an enormous practical value. Such discoveries fueled the Industrial Revolution, which has made our lives twice as long and immeasurably more enjoyable. Irrationalities in physics will, in the long run, bring such progress to a halt and thereby adversely affect your life. Now, don't ask me, if subatomic physics were rational, what life-promoting technology would come from it. I don't know. But I do know that in the long run, as physics goes, so goes technology. So there's a major value at stake here. Now, there's a second way in which the absurdities of contemporary physics affect you. In the Age of Enlightenment, physics served as the leading example of the power of reason. The basic content and method of physics and its spectacular successes sent a message that resounded throughout the Western world. Man can live and prosper by the guidance of his reasoning mind. Physics played an important role in giving rise to the exuberant confidence of an era known for creating beautiful art and political freedom. Now, in contrast, everywhere we look today, from the rise of pseudoscience and drug addiction and religious cults to the state of education in Hollywood and modern art, we see the rejection of reason on a cultural scale. Modern physics sanctions and reinforces that irrationality. Based on the achievements of the past, physicists had acquired the reputation for being leading spokesmen for reason, but now they have betrayed that trust. Today, crazy theories in physics are constantly being used to attack rational principles of philosophy. Anyone lecturing on the objectivist metaphysics will be told that the ideas are outdated. They have been proved wrong by physicists. They say, well, after all, Einstein showed that facts are dependent on the observer's perspective. Atomic theory has gone further and shown that there are no facts until the observer creates them. And what is all this nonsense and objectivism about the power of reason? Physicists have shown that the universe is ruled by chance and is therefore unintelligible. Go into any bookstore today and you'll find a dozen books written by physicists proclaiming that reality is a myth and that reason is helpless. Physics has become a foxhole for mystics and skeptics to hide in while they launch attacks on man's mind. Now, even without this course, I assume that none of you would fall for these arguments. Nevertheless, this nonsense is one cause of despair in the culture around you. It is undercutting people's belief that they live in a universe open to the human mind. That's what prompted Ayn Rand's question, and it should pique your curiosity about how physicists were led to such bizarre conclusions. Okay, well, now you're motivated and we're ready to start. Now, since my thesis is that Kant is the root cause of the irrationality in contemporary physics, you might think we should just dive right into Kant. But I decided that would be a mistake. Without the Rourkes of the world, what is there for the Tuohys to attack? So the story I'm telling here must begin with at least a brief discussion of the ideas that gave rise to physics in the first place. Then you'll know what the villains of the story are attempting to destroy. So we need to start with the hero, the man who was the greatest genius of the age of reason, Isaac Newton. Now, some of you may have taken my course on Newton a few years ago. And now you can sit back and laugh while I try to condense a 5-hour course into 20 minutes. In that course, I identified the essentials that make Newton the father of modern physics. And those essentials are, first, Newton's mathematical method. He invented the calculus, which is the language of modern physics, the means by which physicists can describe rates of change in physical quantities, and compute sums over continuous quantities. Second, Newton's inductive empirical method. He showed clearly for the first time that the abstract principles of physics can only be discovered by systematic observation and experimentation. Third, Newton's unprecedented scale of integration. That is, his discovery of universal laws of physics. Now, Newton's masterpiece, The Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, or Principia, was published in 1687. It is without a doubt the greatest work in the history of science. It includes Newton's proof of his universal laws of motion and gravitation. And as most of you know, most of you know the two laws that I've written on the board here. This class will not have very many equations, but I couldn't resist putting these two up. Newton's second law of motion, which is that force equals mass times acceleration, and his universal law of gravitation, which is that gravitational force equals a universal constant g multiplied by the product of the two masses of the interacting bodies divided by the square of the distance between the bodies. Now, these are exact mathematical laws that apply to every bit of matter in the universe. Newton's discovery of them is an unprecedented achievement. No one before Newton had even conceived of such laws. And that's an important point to keep in mind. It was not that physicists prior to Newton were looking for such laws and just hadn't found them yet. Newton, they had no idea that such things were even possible. So Newton made a fundamental change to people's perspective on the basic goal of physics. Now, Newton showed in the Principia that these laws explain an enormous range of observed facts. In order to convey the scope of Newton's achievement, the way in which he forever changed our view of the universe, I want to give you a brief listing of the physical phenomena that Newton was able to explain.